This is the Rebel Author Podcast, where we talk about books, business, and occasionally bad words. Hello, Rebels, and welcome back to the Rebel Author Podcast, episode 39. This week, I'm also talking to an extra special guest because I am talking to my very first writing tutor, Esther Chilton. We're talking all about how to earn money with short stories, fillers, reader letters, and competitions. But first, last week I talked to my father, Stephen de Koningswater, and much to his delight, I had a lot of comments and love for the episode. So thank you very much to everybody who commented. His ego is now enormous. And I know a few of you have said, will he be back? Will he come on the show? Maybe, maybe not. I definitely need to let his ego deflate back to normal sizes. So thank you all for the love that you gave that episode. I was really pleased as well because I wasn't sure if it was too left field and how it would go down. But yes, thank you. So to last week's question, which was, if you couldn't be a writer, what would you be? And we had a lot of lovely comments. So Kerry Hadisky said, if I couldn't be an author, I would probably have been a teacher. Tom Fowler said, I'd be what I already am, which is an IT professional. Erin McKnight said, that was a great episode. You and your dad were cracking me up. What would I do if I wasn't trying to become an author? I would probably be pursuing a career in music. I did opera in college after all, and I do miss the stage from time to time. Matthew Goodall said, I absolutely adored listening to the two of you. Oh, thank you. And said, it sounds like there's a whole heap more that could be said. Maybe he can come back and interview you sometime. I will think about that. He also said, I haven't laughed so much listening to a podcast in forever. Aw, well, thank you. I am glad the episode rang home, whatever that phrase is. I'm too tired to think about real words. He also said if he wasn't writing as an author, he'd be writing songs and recording them, which I think is lovely. I also thought it was nice that so many of you still wanted to be in like creative fields. And I just realised I've missed somebody. HB Line said, if I wasn't a writer, I'd probably be some other form of creative entrepreneur, maybe a coach or spiritual healer. So again, lots of you in creative industries. Okay, to this week's question, which is, do you write short stories or flash fiction? The book recommendation this week is, of course, our guest's book, which is called Publication Guaranteed, or that at least is the shortened version, and I will include that in the show notes. Okay, to my personal update. It's been a very weird week because it was the end of a quarter, and for me it felt like a real end of a junction or a period. Although we haven't quite finished moving into the house properly because our carpets have been delayed until the 15th of July, and that means we can't really move our furniture in. It was sort of the end of a big period of redecoration and renovation for us. And obviously it was the end of a quarter, as I've mentioned, and I also finished the two non-fiction books that I was co-writing with Jay Thorne on the last day of the quarter too. And we're also easing out of lockdown in the UK, so it really felt like the end of a phase for me. And I do, which I really like, because I get very excited by new and change and the start of things. But it's also a little disorientating, or at least I feel it's a bit disorientating, because I'm trying to like realign myself to a new phase, and that always takes a little bit of time to settle in. I have now set up my quarter 3 projects, which makes me super excited and pumped. Although I'm looking at how many I've got, and I'm just like, Sasha, no, what are you doing? Knowing full well that 2 of the 3 months my son is still not going to be at school. So we will see how that goes. This week I am working on Trey. At last, I know, at last. It's now been 2 years since I published the last fiction book. I have been writing fiction, but I haven't published any. And that is weighing heavily on my mind. And also because I owe readers the next book, let alone the two after that. But anyway, and I am also working on the prose course. Last but by no means least, I have been priming my audio booth, which basically means painting it to seal in any of like the dusty bits of the wood. And so it's all ready for hammering together, which we will do once the carpets have been delivered on the 15th of July. The other thing that really bothers me about the carpets, which is sort of a discovery, is that I still don't have my bookcase. Now, it seems like such a shallow thing to be bothered by, and I really didn't expect to be as bothered as I am, but not having any books in the house and not having like my bookcase on display has really bothered me in a surprising way. I guess I know I'm an author and a bibliophile generally, and therefore obviously I love having books around me, but I seem to sort of derive a pleasure out of just seeing the books and being around them, which is understandable, I suppose, as an author, and probably explains why I'm happy to go to bookstores just to be in the bookstore and not necessarily to buy anything, but just to be surrounded by the books. But yeah, I've been surprised at how bothered I am by that. I don't know what it means. I don't know what to say about it. It's just a discovery. So yeah, how do you guys feel about being around books or being places that don't have books, perhaps? Okay, listener rebel of the week this week is Katrina Hood. Katrina says, this is a story from my teenage years. So my parents brought me a pretty crappy car for my first car. It was $800 and it was a Nissan Bluebird. Anyway, my friends and I used to take it down to the river and drive like crazy around the gravel roads. Needless to say, it wasn't good for the car. Well, anyway, that year for New Year's Eve, my friends were all going away up to Nelson, top of the South Island in New Zealand. And I asked my parents if I could take my car. They said no. To be fair, it was making some pretty dodgy noises and one of the brake pads had recently fallen out. Anyway, did that stop me? No, it didn't. So I pretended I was just driving round to my friend's place and we were going to go in another car. But we took my car. We had only just made it out of town and onto the motorway when it broke down. Luckily, some other friends were able to pick us up and I abandoned the car on the side of the road. I waited until we were a good 2 hours out of town before texting my mum to let her know. Let's just say my parents were less than impressed with me, especially since they had to arrange a tow to get it home. They were not happy when I got back from our trip. I really shouldn't giggle about these things, but I just can't help it. I do so love your stories. If you would like to be a Rebel of the Week, please do send in your rebel story. It can be any kind of rebellion, big, small, or something in between. You can email your rebel story to rebelauthorpodcast@gmail.com or tweet me at rebelauthorpod, or you can post it in the Rebel Authors Facebook group. One new patron this week. Welcome and thank you to Bethany Pratt. I really do appreciate it, and I also appreciate and deeply love all of my current patrons who help to keep the podcast running, and as always, you make me feel like what I do is worthwhile. I have posted a poll in Patreon now to get your votes on what time would work for the Patreon only Q&A. And that is going to be on the 30th of July. So if you haven't already, please make sure you post your vote to let me know what time of day would suit. If you would like to support the show and get access to all of the bonus essays, posts and content, you can from as little as $2 a month by visiting patreon.com/Sasha Black. And that's Sasha with a C and not an S. Quick note on the audio for the show. The audio isn't the best quality this week. I can only apologise. I am in a very echoey room, and I hope that should be sorted very soon and I shouldn't have any more problems. I will make sure that the right mic is recording. Hello and welcome back to the Rebel Author podcast. Today I am joined by an extra special guest, somebody who is super important to me, my very first ever writing tutor. Esther Chilton is a freelance editor, tutor and writer who lives in Newbury, Berkshire. She has had hundreds of articles and short stories published on a broad range of topics in all sorts of magazines and newspapers. Esther loves being a tutor for the Writers' Bureau, and she also helps other writers through her editing, proofreading and advice service. Welcome, Esther.
Thank you very much, Sasha. It's a pleasure to be interviewed by you. It's a real treat.
Yeah, and I am so grateful that I started taking the Writers' Bureau course all those years ago and got to meet you because you had such a huge impact on my writing and my publishing journey. So thank you so much for coming on. And I know that we've got to meet in person, but every time it's always very special and meaningful to me. So thank you.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. And it was great that first time we met up, because I don't often get to meet many of my students. So it's just brilliant. So yes, and to see you on your writing journey and how you've grown and where you are now and where you're going to go, really exciting. So
yeah, and you are one of the few lucky people who got to see my shitty writing before I published. Who saw my terrible first attempts at short stories. Oh my God.
No, I knew there was potential there. I could see it. So.
Okay, so tell everyone a little bit more about you, your writing journey, and how you got to where you are today.
Well, I actually, I've always loved words, and yet I went into banking, which is, it was my dad really saying it's a secure job, it's, it'll earn you good money. And I absolutely hated it. But I stayed there for years. And then I had a fall at home and injured my back. So I couldn't actually work at the bank anymore. And while I was recuperating, I just saw an ad in the newspaper for the Writers' Bureau. And I thought, OK, I've always wanted to do this. Now, why don't I? I've got the time, let's give it a go. I've got nothing to lose. So I took the course and I sort of took their advice, and you sort of start small, writing readers' letters and fillers, gradually building up to articles, short stories, writing competitions. And I found that I was soon having work regularly published, winning competitions and going from strength to strength. And, I thought, this is great. This is something I want to do. And then I actually became a Writers' Bureau tutor myself. And I'm now in my 12th year of being a Writers' Bureau tutor and absolutely love it. I also fell into copywriting sort of by accident and ended up doing a stint at Vodafone. And that was good fun, something completely different. And it's really good because it really hones your writing. You've got to write really succinctly. And then after that, I started my editing and proofreading service a number of years ago. I just thought, well, I've got my Writers' Bureau experience and writing experience. Let's just give it a go. And I tentatively started. And again, it's just gone from strength to strength. And I've not had to advertise or anything. And I get repeat clients and word of mouth. And it's something I really enjoy. So my days are quite busy and full. I have to split them between editing, marking assignments for Writers' Bureau. I also do some Skype tuition with the Writers' Bureau, which is brilliant. Working on articles for magazines, my books, my blog, and I also edit my local Cats Protection magazine. So yeah, it's quite busy. But I love it.
Absolutely. That is an extremely busy schedule. Oh, my goodness. And yes, I will eventually get another book to you. It's only been 2 years since I published fiction. Oh, my God. Anyway, OK, so it's your books that we are here to talk about today. And one specific book, which is called, or the first part of the title is Publication Guaranteed. And this book looks at a niche form of writing and how you can make money with it, specifically reader letters, fillers, articles, short stories, and competitions. So could you briefly explain the difference between each one of those and also how you can actually earn money from each one of those?
Yes, so readers' letters, you start off very small. Readers' letters are everywhere. You find them in local and national newspapers, women's weeklies, gardening magazines, hobby magazines, writing magazines. There are letters everywhere. And they vary in the type of letter they publish. Some publish articles about articles and issues previously mentioned in the magazine or newspaper. Others like personal stories or rants about things that annoy you. There's all sorts. Some don't actually pay, or you win a prize if your letter's published. Others, for example, a lot of the women's weeklies do pay for letters. I still write readers' letters now. Really enjoy writing them. They're short, easy to do, and I'm lucky to have them regularly published. And it is possible to earn sort of up to £200 a month just from readers' letters. And again, it doesn't take much. They're short, sometimes under 50 words. So I will always tend to write several of those a month and send them off. And then you soon sort of find you've got checks coming in. Fillers. A lot of people aren't sure what a filler is and are quite confused, but it's essentially just a short article, often under 500 words. An example of a publication that uses them is Reader's Digest. They have a slot, it's a travel feature of around 400 words, inviting readers' travel stories. And they pay for those, and they also have a true life anecdote slot, and again they pay for those, and it's just a few words about a funny that sort of happened. The women's weeklies also have lots of slots, and they're often in terms of even like a beauty question that you ask, and they pay for those. They also have lots of opportunities just for photos and just a little caption underneath, and again they pay for those. Moving on to articles, magazines and newspapers need articles about all sorts of topics, from anniversaries to sport to health to nostalgia. Some do use in-house writers, others use freelance writers. They can vary in the length. Payment also varies between publications, but if you regularly have articles accepted, it's possible to make a good income from them. Short stories. The short story market has changed dramatically over the years with fewer paying markets, but they're still out there in the form of the women's weeklies, literary magazines, e-zines and more. Sometimes you can find a market that you didn't even know published short stories, such as a cat magazine. Again, payment varies. In terms of competitions, there are numerous short story and poetry competitions out there. You'll find some that have a prize fund running into 4 figures, while others simply offer publication as a prize. It's not easy to regularly win writing competitions and to earn lots of money, as judging is very subjective. But if you do win, as well as a possibility of a decent cash prize, it gives you your writing authority. You can write, your writing is being picked over others, and your writing was good enough to win a writing competition. And if it's good enough to do that, it's good enough to send out to editors and to get published elsewhere. So those are essentially sort of like the differences sort of between them and sort of ways you can earn from them.
And should a writer start with any particular one? Should they just plump for it, have a go, see what's out there? Or would you advise like starting with one particular one?
I think it's good. It's like the Writers' Bureau advised you to start, with sort of small. And again, that's what I've sort of shown in my path, with the book. If you start with something like a reader's letter, it's small, it's short, and it's just wonderful. When students sort of say, I've had a reader's letters published. It's only a reader's letter, but it's publication and it gives you confidence. And that's exactly what I found. Having readers' letters published, I then had confidence to start writing fillers and articles and short stories. And so it's good to start small because you need that confidence to go on. Whereas I used to, I wrote short stories years ago and I sent them out to like Woman's Weekly and the People's Friend. They were all rejected and they were crap, absolute crap. So I can see now, I look back and I think, oh my God, yes, no wonder that wasn't published. And then when I took the course, it's starting off small and you learn your craft and you build as you go along. Whereas I think sometimes if you start too big, and it's the same with writing competitions, it's like I entered writing magazine competitions and it was like, oh, I didn't win. And then once I sort of started off small and learned about research as well, market research is so important, I then began to win them and sort of see. So I think it's not expecting too much. There are some writers who are fantastic, phenomenal, and they win straight away. But they're the few. You know, a lot of us have to do our craft, and you know, like, remember those stories, Sasha, that you used to send in, you know, somewhere.
Oh God, this is so awkward. Yes, I do remember those terrible stories. I actually found the other day the very first draft of Keepers, and fuck me, it was so terrible. Like, the strange thing is, I can still see the story there, so all the characters are there, all of the like the plot is there, but oh my God, the writing is just so bad. But also that's wonderful, because that shows me quite how far I have come. And it's funny, because I'm like in this weird place now where I am trying desperately hard to finish the third book in the series, and I'm really struggling because my writing has come so far just from the version of Keepers that actually got published. So I've got this internal conflict where I'm like, well, I'm not in love with Keepers anymore, because I can see there are problems and issues there. But that is who I was as a creative and a writer at the time. So I published the best book I could publish then. But because so much time has elapsed, it's making it really hard for me to finish the series. But anyway, I still have my very first reader's letter that got published. And I kept a copy of the magazine, which I don't know if is like, you know, silly, but yeah, it meant a lot to me when I got it published. And so yeah, it was in Diva magazine, although I only had an initial because I didn't want my name in it at the time. But yes, I kept it because I was like, that was me.
Yeah, I think it's important to do. I mean, I do still have a lot of things that I have had published, magazines and all sorts of things like that. And actually, it's quite nice to look back on those, especially because we all, as writers, we have those moments where we're like, I'm shit, I can't write, I'm no good. And it's good to look at them and think, yes, oh, I did that, I can write, it's good, you know, and just to give you, you know, that feeling of, yes, I'm going to do this, I'm going to continue, you know, because I know so many writers are like, oh no, I'm going to stop, and they do, and no, you know, you can always continue. But I think also it's good to look back and see how you've grown, like you have. And you know, yeah, and I think the same in terms of books. You know, we're all going on a writing journey. We've all got a lot to learn. And I find, like now, I subscribe to a writing magazine, and I learn from it all the time, and I read and devour the articles in there. And I think, you know, even though I've been writing for a long time and I'm a tutor myself, I think we all learn from others and can look at things in different ways.
Absolutely. I don't get to the end of a book without having learned something these days, just because I like to deconstruct them so much. And yeah, and whether that be a good lesson or a bad lesson, you know, you learn from the bad stuff as well as the good stuff.
Yes.
Okay, I've noticed that lots of competitions and places take shorts and short stories, but they have particular style preferences. So for those wanting to enter, what advice would you give them for actually fitting a style that may not match their natural voice?
With regards, first of all, to magazines and short stories, the best advice is to immerse yourself in the magazine, read, devour their stories. Then you can get a really strong feeling for their style and what they're looking for. I think that's especially important in terms of the women's weeklies, because, you know, for example, a magazine like The People's Friends likes quite, you know, sort of cozy, heartwarming stories. And again, you've got to get the style and the feel right. It takes quite a while, and I know it took me a while to get it right for them, but I think once you've got it, you're really in there. But it's just through reading the magazine, really sort of taking apart their stories, that it really helps you to then write your own to fit in. And with regard to competitions, I think sometimes that's quite hard because every competition is different. You've got judges that are different. But again, if you take a competition that's been running for a number of years, you can read previous winning stories. You know, often you'll sort of see, and it's good to see what makes a winning story, the type of writing, the type of feel, the style, the tone, the language. and it helps you understand a bit more about what the judge is looking for and the competition as a whole. And if you can find out a little bit about the judge too, that helps. What writing do they do? What kind of style? It sort of gives you then an idea of what they're going to like. And so it'll help you to get your story, sort of right, and you stand sort of a better chance. I mean, judges always say that they're looking for something a bit different, but again, they still have their preferences, as to what they like.
Different but same.
Yeah, that's it. How many times do we hear that?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so I personally have always found the extremes of writing easy. So flash fiction, for example, that is under 300 words or under 100 words or whatever. And then similarly writing novels. But I can't seem to write short stories. So anything that's within that 1,500 words to sort of 10,000 words in length, I just either it's flash fiction or it becomes a novel or a novel idea, which is really frustrating because it stops me from entering lots of these things. How do you keep a nugget of story small enough that it stays within the confines of a short story? And how much, what are the differences between a 2,000 word short story and a 10,000 word short story, for example?
Yeah, it is quite difficult. I know I've been quite lucky. I do find it comes quite easily to me. I can write like flash fiction, but I can write a short story as well. I do tend to, write a lot of like 1,500 word stories. I mean, I have written sort of 5,000 word stories, but I tend to keep it sort of smaller, whereas I find like, I'm not sure I could write a 90,000 word novel. It's quite interesting actually, because I think, it's easy to write a short story, but how do people write the novel? Whereas, it's like my partner writes really, long novels, but he can't write a short story. I mean, he's recently revamped a short story of his that was 10,000 words and it's now 70,000 words. So it's a novel.
Amazing.
Yeah, he finds it hard to do what I do, but then I'm not sure I could do what he does, So I think sometimes, you have a talent in a certain, sort of niche. But I think, I do want to write a novel, so I'm sure, and it's something I do want to do. But I do know people will often say to me, how do you manage to bring a story to life and get people to care about the characters in only a few words? But I tend to find the key planning, definitely. I don't always go into great depth, but I do find it helps to plan. So before I start, I'll outline the story. I'll know the beginning, the middle and end. And then I tend to, once I've planned the story, I tend to leave it and let it work its way in my mind. So I might be washing up or going for a walk. And I'll let the sort of characters, the setting, the scene, how the events are going to unfold. I'll let it sort of grow and work its way. And sometimes it does take a very different path to one I have planned. But I do sort of have a notebook so I can jot down ideas and then I'll sort of tweak my plan before I start. But I do find with a short story, tight, succinct writing is a must. Otherwise, it can grow. You can let the characters and story, it takes over. And so it does become more like a novella or a novel. So I always find every word has to count. All the stories I write have set limits, whether it's for a competition, a woman's weekly. So once I know my story plan as I write, I know how much of the story I need to devote to the beginning, how much the middle, the climax. So I tend to sort of really have worked out into my head, in my head. And I do find it quite, I'm okay with sticking to that word limit. I also find I'm not one of these writers who you need to write a 1,500 word story and you find you've got 3,000 words at the end and then you've got to really trim it back. I tend to be able to sort of do that, but I do think it helps having come from, again, I don't know if it's like writing readers' letters to start with, because you have to keep those short. Also doing the copywriting, because you really have to, keep that, within a frame. So I do think that helps. But I do find the planning really does help, and then you can keep everything tight. But I do tend to, because within the short stories, you've still got to get into the character's head. You've still got to connect with the reader. But I tend to really imagine myself as a character, how they would feel, how they would see things. And, you know, so I do sort of try and get immersed in the story, but still within the constraints of keeping it sort of short. And I think also, don't have too many characters, because otherwise then it is going to develop into something longer. You know, they usually say no more than 4. And don't make the story too complex either, because then you've got all sorts of different threads, and then it sort of, it takes over from you, you know, as well. So you've got to keep that tight.
Yeah, that's probably part of my problem, is when I try and think of, when I create story, generally it is complicated. The next book I write, though, I'm going right back and simplifying everything. So I have like a tagline, and that is like the whole premise of the book, and so I'm trying to keep it. There's only like 2 subplots, whereas the whole Keeper series went a bit nuts, and I made that very new boy, new girl, new schoolboy era, whatever the phrase is, of trying to put everything into a book. Yeah, whereas I'm not doing that with the next one. Okay, how do you go about finding places that actually pay for fillers and short stories and articles and competitions, etc.?
So the research is absolutely key. When I started writing many moons ago, the internet wasn't around, and so you had to physically go to the newsagents and find magazines to write for. So I still do that. You do need an actual copy of the magazine you're writing for. Otherwise, how do you know what they actually want? If you write something and then you try and fit it to a market, or you just dash it off to the market, you're going to reduce your chances of being accepted. There are lots of tools nowadays to help you to find markets to write for. There's one that I've just signed up to called Readly, and it allows you to download hundreds of magazines for a set price per month. And at the moment, they do have like a special offer. You get a couple of weeks free. And I found it really good. You know, I've got it, like, you can just have it on your laptop, or you can have it on your phone as an app, and you can just have a look. So it's really invaluable. So you're not having to spend lots of money per month, you know, to find magazines. So I'm finding that's a really good tool. At least, you know, you may not be able to see, you know, sort of writer's guidelines, but if you can see the magazine, you can then email, you know, you can find out the details from that. I also, as I've said, subscribe to Writing Magazine. They have lots of brilliant competitions themselves, and they also give you information of lots of others as well. They actually have a pullout every year detailing thousands of, you know, magazine competitions to enter, and they also have lots of pages on magazines accepting articles and short stories, and I've actually found lots of new markets that way from their information. There's also the Writers and Artists Yearbook. A lot of us tend to think of that as like being like a publisher's and agent's guide, and it is, it's fabulous, but they also have lots of magazines and newspapers as well, and they often give information about whether freelance submissions are accepted and payment information as well.
I didn't know that.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, it is useful, because I think a lot of people tend to miss that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I was quite fortunate enough to get this year's one. It was a prize for a star letter in Writing Magazine, so I got a new one this year. And yeah, there's loads of magazines in there, so it's a good tool to have, you know, for all sorts of reasons, as well as the writing advice it gives. And also you can just use Google. You can type into your writing competitions, and you'll get, you know, hundreds will come up, all sorts of things. If you want to write for a cat magazine, you can just put, you know, cat magazines, and lots will come up, you know, international ones as well. If you want to write for the women's weeklies, even if you put writers' guidelines for the women's weeklies, you'll often find some of those will come up, like for Women's Weekly or the People's Friend. So that can be really useful. So there's all sorts of ways.
Amazing. And I've written down Readly, and if you can send me the link, I'll make sure it goes into the show notes as well.
Yes, yeah, no, will do.
Perfect. Okay, so what mistakes do you see writers making when they try to do these shorts or fillers or articles?
It's very easy to make lots of mistakes, and I know, because I made them myself, you know, many years ago. So with readers' letters, it's very easy to make them too long. The editor wants to get as many letters on the page as they can, so keep it short. A good thing to do is to look at the publication and actually count the number, the average word length of the letters so that you get it right. For example, I've seen sort of writers, they'll write something that's like 300 words, and the average is 50 words in the publication. So editors will, sometimes they'll edit a letter, but if you've written a 300-word letter, they're not going to for a 50-word slot. They haven't got the time. The wrong type of letter is also an issue. For example, if a magazine only publishes letters about issues previously covered in the magazine, don't write in about a funny incident involving your Auntie Barbara. It'll be rejected. So, that's very easy to do. Or sometimes you think, they could do with this type of letter. They don't want it, so you've got to keep to what they're looking for. And it's a similar case with fillers and articles. Often the wrong type of piece is sent in, or something that's too long. And as I've just said, writers write what they think the magazine should publish rather than what the magazine actually publishes. So writers need to familiarise themselves with the publication and the type of writing the magazine uses. As regards short stories, you do need to offer something a little different. Often writers cover the same old themes. That's fine, but look at that theme from a different angle. Try and give it a new spin. It is quite difficult with women's magazines, particularly because they like things a certain way. But again, you do need to put a slightly different spin on it. Otherwise, it's, sort of the same old. With short stories, writers sometimes forget that there needs to be an actual story. It needs structure. It needs that beginning to hook the reader's interest, the main body to create tension and conflict, building up a sense of atmosphere all the while, propelling the reader along with the characters towards the story's climax. And then the ending needs to leave the reader satisfied. It mustn't fall flat, otherwise your hard work will all be for nothing. And whatever you do, don't let it all have been a dream. I still see that from time to time.
No.
Yes, yeah. And it's just, no.
Oh my God, ultimate cliche.
Yeah. Really
okay, so you're an editor. What tips or advice do you have for writers on editing their stories and articles for these markets?
So, in terms of corrections and mistakes, we all make them, but always set your work aside for a day or so after you've completed it. Then read it through with fresh eyes. We all get so close to our work. So often, if we've missed a word, for example, we automatically fill it in because we know what it should say. And looking at a piece of work as a whole, in the case of a story or article for a magazine, it's a good idea to go back to the magazine and read several articles or stories in the magazine, depending on what you've written, then go back to your own. I've done this many a time, especially when I'm writing for a magazine I haven't written for before. Be really analytical, stand back and think, okay, have I got mine right? Does it fit in with those articles or stories in the magazine? It's sometimes hard to do that, but I've learned to do that and really, be critical. Have I used subheadings like the articles in the magazine? What about box outs? Have I brought the article to a satisfactory conclusion? In the case of a short story, does the opening ramble on too long? Are my paragraphs too long in comparison to those stories in the magazine? Have I ended the story in the way the magazine likes, for example, with a twist? Is the storyline strong enough? And I'll then look at it and make any necessary changes. So you really do need to stand back, because it is hard because it's our precious piece of work, but it is essential for getting published.
Should a writer send it to an editor, like a paid editor, before they then send it to the magazine?
They can do. I mean, I have edited articles and short stories for people. They've wanted that. But it's very much a matter of whether you want to or not. And I think again, it depends on how sort of confident so you're sort of feeling in yourself.
Would an article or a short story that had a couple of typos or mistakes in it be rejected, do you think? Or would they be forgiving of that?
No, they would be forgiving. you know, because I mean, sometimes I do actually see, even in, you know, magazines, sometimes I think things have got a little bit sloppier, dare I say, and I do sometimes find when I'm reading an article there are mistakes in there, you know, and I think, you know, that's I mean, really they should be corrected in there, but I don't think if the article or the short story is good enough, it will, you know, it will be picked up. It really will. So I don't think that's too much of an issue. So I think really, in terms of getting edited, it's really if you're really unsure about the content, you know, if there's more sort of to it, if you know, then perhaps. But I will say, sort of like if you've got like in the case of a competition, if you've got a judge picking out 2 stories, if one is absolutely brilliantly written with no mistakes, the other's also brilliantly written with lots of mistakes, they will pick the one that doesn't have the mistakes. So try and get it as error-free as you can, but 1 or 2, it's really not going to matter.
Okay. All right, this is always my favourite question. So this is the Rebel Author Podcast. Tell everyone about a time you unleashed your inner rebel.
Right. Well, I saw that and I thought, well, my new book is all about keeping within guidelines and producing what editors and judges want. So much of my writing life has been about keeping within boundaries. And so there's not been much chance to, you know, rebel. So I thought, well, I'll look at rebelling in a slightly different way. And I'm actually doing it right now at this moment in taking part in this podcast, because it's completely outside of my comfort zone, as is teaching at Swanwick Summer School this year. So obviously that's been postponed to next year because of COVID-19. But I put myself forward to teach a course this year. It scares the hell out of me, the thought of standing up in front of an audience and talking. But I want to do it, and I want more of it to grasp every opportunity. And it would be easy not to carry on as I am, but there's something inside me, and perhaps it is that rebellious side that's urging me on, that's saying, go on, do it. So it's a case of feeling the fear and doing it anyway.
Yeah, amen. That's exactly how I live my life. Whatever I'm afraid of, I have to do, with the exception of jumping out of a plane, which I just think is madness. I don't know why anybody does that.
No, I completely agree.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you for your time. Tell everyone where they can find out more about you, your books, and your editing services.
So the main place you can find me is my blog. I blog about all things writing, including tips and publications to write for. I also hold regular writing challenges, including limericks and short stories. So you can find it if you just look up Esther Chilton blog. You'll find a section on my books, which are all available from Amazon, as well as my editing services, should anyone want some help. You can email me. It's just estherchilton@gmail.com. You'll also find me on Twitter. So it's at Esther Newton 201 is where you can find me there.
And I highly recommend Esther's editing service. I have used it multiple times and she is an exceptional editor. So yes, I do highly recommend using her, and I will include links in all the show notes. And actually, one other compliment, whenever I am full and I can't do developmental edits, guess where I send everybody? Straight to Esther. So yes, I highly recommend Esther's editing service.
You're making me blush. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time today. And thank you also to all of the show's patrons. If you would like to get early access to all of the episodes, then you can do so by visiting patreon.com/Sasha Black. Thank you to all of our listeners as well today. I'm Sasha Black, you were listening to Esther Chilton, and this was the Rebel Author Podcast. Next week, I'll be talking to Joseph Alexander, who, after a publishing rebellion, turned around and has a business that sold over 600,000 books. So that is next week. Don't forget to tune in and subscribe on your podcatcher. And when you have a moment, please leave a review.